So I'm gonna record, starting to record again. Perfect. Welcome back. Hopefully everyone's feeling refreshed a little bit. I know I am. I had to get some caffeine and nicotine. So where were we? Objective 2. All right. So you can see the right screen. This one here. All right. Nope, that's the wrong screen. There we go. All right, everyone can see objective 2 up on your screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So this objective, we're going to explain the role of the employer and the employee in regards to OH&S regulations, Bill C-45, workplace hazardous material information, so WHMIS, fire regulations, WCB board regulations, and related advisory boards and agencies. Were you guys able to annotate? Somebody just did that.
Oh, that was me. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't realize you'd be able to. That's interesting. That's actually good.
No.
If you have a question.
No, I actually just touched the screen and tried to see if it's virtual or just real. So I actually can touch your screen at the same time.
Oh yeah. Okay. Hey, that's interesting.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. So that's not bad. I mean, if somebody has a question, it's like, you know, you can actually say, hey, I'm asking about this right here, and you can write around it or something like that. So that's not the end of the world. I don't think anyhow. So
new discovery.
Yeah, a new discovery, exactly. Yeah. I think we're gonna have a lot of those over the next eight months. So as far as all of this goes. Employer responsibilities. So what are the people you work for, your employers? If you employ one person, you are an employer. The definition of an employer, right? So any person who's in charge of you, so your service managers or representatives, they're designated by the employer as the employer's representative. Any of these people above you essentially are going to be termed as your employer. And that just means that regardless of if it's your shop foreman telling you to do something incorrect or if it's the president of the company, they're all considered your employer under the code. So like I said, it's their responsibility to be familiar with the act, regulation, and code as it applies to their work site. So hopefully if you're working at a place, for instance, that ships paper towel, you probably aren't too worried about the explosives regulations and hazards when it comes to that. It's going to be up to your employer to know exactly what you're going to be doing, and they need to do everything reasonable to protect your health and safety. Employee responsibilities. So these are what you need to do. Why do you need to care? Because you can get a ticket. Has anyone gotten a ticket from OH&S? Anyone out there in the internet land?
Not me.
Not you? No. So I have seen people get tickets for no safety glasses, no guards on grinders, and the last one, which was probably I don't necessarily agree with, was that the leather in their work boots were ripped as so that the steel toe was exposed. And all three of those were $500. And that's not to your employer, that's to you. You have to pay that fine. Your employer isn't happy either because they most likely got a fine that was 10 times that amount. So if you got a $500 fine, you probably got a $5,000 fine, and then that went against their safety record as well. OH&S, all these safety programs work alongside different other ones as well. And they all are very, very similar, but it's very important that you have to know what you need to do. Like I said, ignorance of the law is no reason not to follow it. This is the same when it applies to this. Just because you didn't know doesn't mean you get away with it. What it actually means is you should have been told that there's something you should know, or you should have realized that, hey, my training isn't sufficient for this. I need some proper information. For instance, we get a new chemical in, and you don't want to go and rip open that barrel without knowing what that chemical is, proper safety handling procedures, proper first aid procedures, all the things associated with WHMIS. Because you go start ripping that barrel open and you accidentally pour it on yourself, that's not the time to start reading the safety sheets then. But then it's a little bit too late at that point. So it's always your responsibility. The key responsibilities you have as an employee: report any hazardous or potentially hazardous situations to your supervisor. Report all injuries immediately. That is a big one that not many people follow. Wear all PPE, ensure it's in good condition. Inspect all equipment, tools, and machinery before use. Defective equipment, including PPE, is not to be used and must be replaced or reported to your supervisor. So I'm sure something that everybody sees a lot of at their work site is people using PPE properly. And I'll give you a good demonstration of how it looks at most work sites, especially. So now we have the mask regulations, right? So what I anticipate is when we're in the shop, we're going to have a lot of students that probably are going to look something like this. So you can see I'll have my mask down here into my mask collection area, and then I'll have my safety glasses up on my forehead, protecting my forehead. This is obviously not how we are supposed to wear our PPE. It would be our responsibility to wear it properly, right? So that's something I'm expecting that we're going to see a lot of. And that's going to be all of this new COVID regulations it actually falls beyond this PPE, but under the same heading essentially, because all of this is a little bit, we've never had anything like this before. The whole world has never gone through anything like this. So with a whole city implementing a mask bylaw that masks need to be worn inside, it goes beyond the scope of OH&S. It's a little bit different right now, but still the same rules apply. Like with safety glasses and stuff, I know the reason people get fines for not wearing safety glasses is because they are wearing them like this. But when you're in a shop, the entire time you're in a shop, your safety glasses need to be over your eyes, not over your forehead. So things like that are what you're going to need to be aware of. Participate in the regularly scheduled worksite safety planning meetings. So that's something, is there anyone who isn't doing worksite safety planning meetings? At this point in industry, almost everybody should be doing this in some form or another. Almost all of your work sites will be big enough to have something. And if they're not big enough, chances are they've been hounded by OH&S or WCB in order to get on board with the health and safety committee. The other responsibility you have is to make sure you know and follow the emergency procedures prepared for by your employment work site. So in case of an emergency, what are you going to do? If there's a first aid emergency, if there's a fire, if there's an explosion, if you need to evacuate, what do you need to do? So you need to make sure you know that as well. And the last one, do not perform any work you feel is unsafe or requires you to perform any activity that could cause injury to you or your coworker. So you have the responsibility. It is a responsibility to not perform any work. It used to be a number of years ago, they said it was your right. It's your right to refuse unsafe work. Well, what the reason they changed that to your responsibility is not to perform and to make sure no one else does either. It's because, Nathaniel, and just because I can see you on my screen, do you like Nate better? I think that was your email. I can just see. Okay, Nate, I can see my screen. So Nate, he's a pretty smart guy, and he's not scared to tell the boss no. So I tell him, hey, there's that trailer up on cinder blocks. And you go slide underneath there and just quickly take that brake chamber off. It'll just be quick, don't worry. And he tells me to go screw my hat. That's dangerous, boss. It's my right not to do it. And I say, okay, well, how about Liam? Liam likes to keep his job, and he's a bit of a pushover. Hey, Liam, how about you go underneath there? So now Liam goes and does it. Now it's Nate's responsibility to make sure, hey, I can't do that, but you know what? It's not because I just value myself more or think I'm better than Liam or anything like that. It's because no one should be doing it that way. Okay, that's now your responsibility. In addition to all these responsibilities, you need to be aware and in control of your personal safety. No one cares about you like you do. I guarantee it. A lot of you have probably been in a position where it seems like your employer, all they may be, and yet again, I don't want to throw anyone's workplace under the bus. I don't know where any of you work. A lot of companies are good. There's just many who aren't, and some of them who are sort of just neutral around there, who try their best, but they're nothing special. So yet again, you are your own best advocate. You're the one who's going to know if you're going to keep yourself safe. If you do not know the dangers, how can you expect to keep yourself safe? So you need to make sure that you ask your employer, what are the dangers of your job? What are the things? What are any other hazards? So if you're working for a bulk hauling company, and for instance, you have to go change brakes on a tanker. Well, what was in that tanker? Because it makes a big difference if the tanker was hauling milk or if it was hauling fuel. It makes a very big difference on how you can perform work on it, where you can take it into. A tank that had fuel in it can't go into a shop unless it's been certified steam cleaned. And if you ever want to know why, it's because if you go start torching something off of that tank, an empty fuel tank is significantly more dangerous than a full one, because the empty one is full of vapor, which is what is flammable. In Edmonton, there's a couple shops that I've been to, and you can see where the new part of the roof is, where the part of the trailer went through the roof after it exploded. So just one instance of, if you don't know what's in that tank, I wouldn't go strike up a torch next to it necessarily, or strike up an arc on it to weld a mud flap on, or whatever the case may be, to weld a bracket back into place without knowing what's in that tank. Will you receive job safety training, and when? So it requires your employers, the code or the regulation requires your employers to train you. At least at basic, all of you should have taken WMIS. That's probably the most basic one that everybody in Alberta needs to take. So anytime you've gone to a new job, they've given you some sort of WMIS training, I hope, at the bare minimum. So what happens if I refuse to perform a job because of safety? If you're asked to do something that may endanger you or your coworkers, and you have not been given ADNIC training or supervision, the law requires you to refuse to do that work. The law then requires that you refuse to do it, and also protects you from disciplinary action from your employer. So they cannot, if they're telling you to jump off a bridge, you can say no, because it's dangerous, and they can't fire you for it. Regular safety meetings. So this has changed a little bit. It doesn't require all workplaces to conduct them, but it's a certain size. I believe it's 24 or 25 employees now. Then you have to have one. If not, if they don't have to, but they do, like this last part of the sentence says, that would be a good indication that your employer is committed to industry safety standards and the protection of the employees, right? The bare minimum is the bare minimum. If only the reason the laws are there is so that they can't get away with doing nothing. If they're just doing the bare minimum, yeah, they're just getting by. But if you're at a place that's a lot more proactive, that really does care about you, I mean, that's a lot better. When will I be expected to wear safety equipment? Will you receive training on how to use it? You should. If it's required, your employee is responsible to train you and maintain the use and how to use it properly. So how to use it, when to use it, and how to maintain it. Also, how to inspect it. So another thing that would be in here within maintenance is, for instance, some of you probably have taken fall protection. I'm sure some of you go up onto heights where you've had to do fall protection. And so when it came to that, not only did they provide you with the harness, they told you when you're going to need to use it, how to inspect it. So when it could go out of service, right? If the harness starts getting ripped, any kind of wear and tear in it, anything like that, throw it out, cut it up and throw it out. Same thing with the lanyards, right? Your fall arrest lanyards. It caught somebody, cut it and throw it out. So they're going to tell you when you need all of these, how to use it, how to maintain it, and how to inspect it. So a lot of you as well have probably have crane training, overhead crane training, and that's going to be a daily inspection as well for all of the crane implements. And then there's a more in-depth monthly and quarterly and yearly inspections that go along with that as well. Something important to know, and especially for us, once you get into the shop, we're going to know where the fire extinguishers are, first aid kits, and the emergency equipment. So things like fire hoses, emergency exits, the alarms, where all of these things are located. Very, very important for you to know. And what do I do if I get hurt? Who is a first aid person? So that is something we will definitely be telling you in the shop. To know where to go if you do get hurt, who to tell. Are any of you trained first aiders?
Yep.
I can see Keeper is, Nate is. A few of you said, yeah, okay. So we have a few first aiders. Okay, good. That's good because my first aid expired and I don't plan on renewing it. So you're on your own. I'm just kidding. We'll make sure you get help if you get injured. But so far, so good. So most of the time, any of the injuries we get are just small little ones. Speaking of small little ones, if you get a small little cut and you just need a Band-Aid, is that something you should report to your employer?
Yes.
Yes. Whoever said yes is absolutely correct. I'm going to bring it on to me for a bit. You're absolutely correct. You know, I don't know who said yes, but you know why that is.
Case of infections or something.
Mm-hmm.
You're down the road, your finger falls off. There's a record of it.
That is
And the record, yeah.
Yep, that's exactly it.
OH&S will want to know why there's missing stuff from the first aid kit.
That too. Yep, that's the other reason, because they go and do inventory on this stuff. And they want to know when little things happen, exactly what someone said in case your finger falls off. So I know one of the instructors I worked with had an eye injury, and still years later and a number of surgeries later, he's still dealing with that problem. And this came from industry when he was actually working in the trade, and it hasn't been for quite a long time. And so now he still has eye problems with that. Even I have sustained injuries from working, and you know, sometimes you pull a muscle, seem that bad. A day later, a week later, and it really gets really bad. And now you're starting to think, well, I should go see somebody. If you didn't report it at all, it's going to be a big headache to try and get any compensation if it ends up being something severe or something that you even just miss a day for. Sometimes WCB, all it is you needed to go to so for instance, I've had to go get metal extracted from my eye. I was only gone for the rest of that shift. Go to the ER, they take the metal out of your eye. They'll ask you at the hospital, was this happened at work? Yes, it did. They'll ask you a whole bunch of questions. Were you wearing safety equipment? And be honest, I guess, because if your employer isn't making you wear these things, they should be. And then, doctor says, okay, take the rest of the night off. I'll write that on your report. You show up to work the next day, good to go. The government sends you a check for your missed time. It's like 80% of it or 50% of it or something. It's something at least. So even just missing that one little initial checkup, nothing serious happened, but you did go get checked out. WCB will cover that as well. The employers, oftentimes, there was a point where lots of employers didn't want people to report small injuries, stuff like that. I think most employers nowadays have realized that it's counterproductive. Like one person said, OH&S is going to find out that there's things happening if all of the band-aids are constantly gone from the toolbox. They're going to say, hey, if everyone's constantly getting cut on their fingers, maybe you should just everyone wear gloves. It's not a bad idea. We do want to prevent any kind of injuries, even those minor ones. Sometimes those little paper cuts annoy us throughout the day, and they can really impact your quality of life in the long run, right? I don't know about all of you, but I don't live to work. I work so that I can live. And so I don't want to have something that's bothering me at the end of my workday because of some really silly minor injury or something like that. Okay. Wimmis. So I got a screen share. So right now you're still looking at me, I think. There we go. Wimmis. So for all of us, we work around hazardous materials classified under the regulatory system. So if you've ever squeezed brake clean out of a can or used methyl hydrate or air brake antifreeze or any of those things, those are all regulated materials, hazardous materials that are classified under this system. So all of us should have taken WMIS from our workplace at some time or another. And they're, like I said, required to provide you with this training. So it's going to be a general introduction to WMIS with the contents. And who's taken WMIS recently and knows what this isn't the right term anymore? Yeah. So what are they called now?
Aren't they called?
Sorry?
Aren't they called SDSs now?
I believe it's MDS, Material Data Sheet.
Yeah, it's MDS.
Yeah, it's Material Data Sheet is what they're, instead of MSDS, it's MDS, Material Data Sheet.
When did that change?
2016, I believe.
Yeah, my first aid course, they still call it SDSs.
Mm.
I just did that last month.
And maybe I'm wrong, because this, in our ILMs, it's still the old version too. And yet again, MSDSs, SDSs, MDS, as long as we know that that's the piece of paper that has the info for that chemical that we're going to be using, that's the important thing. What is the MSDS or the SDS or the MDS? They're all the same thing. And they're all going to have the same information on them as well, the MSDSs. And the other training that you're probably going to get is training in the purpose and significance of your job. So that's going to be when you should be wearing hearing protection, if you need fall protection. For us in the fuel industry, it would be how to sniff for gas, how to find out if a unit has been steamed. Some of the other things we would have to do is confined space entry. And we also had to do H2S alive. And so you had to know some of those things. Yet again, it's going to depend where you work. as to what safety they're going to be training you with. But if you're exposed to these situations, that's what you're going to have to take. So your worksite specific training must cover the 4 specific areas: hazard information, the different modes of product identification used at the workplace, procedures for safe use, and procedures for dealing with fugitive emissions or emergencies at the worksite. So all employees have to do WMIS training, and including in WMIS training is how to interpret supplier labels, workplace labels, and the data sheets, the significance of the information found on them, how to apply a workplace label, so how to make one and when to make one, how to safely handle and store controlled products, how to safely dispose of controlled products, how to respond to a spill or a leak, and how to interpret color coding or any other visible identification system used instead of workplace labeling. So this one's a weird one. Has anyone ever seen a pipe in your shop that maybe was yellow or red or something to that effect? A big pipe running through the ceiling?
They have a lot of them coated at the mill.
Yeah, oh yeah, mills would do that too. So those color coding will be used to label what's in those pipes. Some will be steam, some will be gas, natural gas, whatever the case may be. So, and yet again, if you work at the mill, they probably told you that. These pipes have this in it, these pipes have that in it, whatever the case may be. So that's something not super common in our trade, but it does happen there. So. So every now and again, they're supposed to test you. They consider that you've met the requirement if you can answer the following questions. So what are the hazards of the controlled product? So let's say we're using brake clean. They'd say, hey, we need to make sure your WMIS training is up to date. What are the hazards of that brake clean you're using there? And you tell them, you know, that it has fumes, that it is corrosive, and that it's toxic if you touch it. How do you protect it from those hazards? Well, you use it in a well-ventilated area away from sparks, and you wear hand protection, prophylactics, rubber gloves. What do you do in case of an emergency? Well, it depends. What's the emergency? Contact with skin, you flush with water for 15 minutes. If it's ingested, you call the poison control center and don't induce vomiting, depending on what the exposure is or what the emergency is. Fire, obviously, you'd get the appropriate fire extinguisher, inform people of the fire, try and put it out, whatever that your procedure is at your workplace. And where can you get additional hazard information? So that would generally be at the MDSs is where you can get those. What's your responsibility? So you are responsible for the following. You have to go to the training. You have to use that information to protect yourself, to apply workplace labels where and when required, and demonstrate the application of safe work procedures when controlled products and the knowledge of why those products are required. So once you've taken the training, or even before you've taken the training, you shouldn't be making a flamethrower with like brake clean cans. That's going to not be a safe and best work practice, okay? Even though I know we can do it very easily. Applying workplace labels where and when. This is a big one because I'm sure all of us have seen random spray bottles, jugs, containers that has mystery liquid and goo in it. Who really knows what they are anymore? Workplace labels are very, very important, especially when you consider if you have a bench, bottom of the workbench is full of mystery cans that have the labels ripped off, spray bottles that are full of random things, oil jugs that you were used to drain random things out. And now there's a fire that happens underneath it. You have no idea what any of these are. Maybe some of them are flammable, maybe they're not. Maybe they're gonna release a really, really toxic gas when they're burned. You don't know, and that's why it's storage and proper labeling, very, very important. Fire. Fire causes the loss of buildings and equipment each year in the millions of dollars. So there was just a fire in Edmonton the other day. Fires can be very bad. 3 things you need for fire: air, fuel, and ignition, which is heat. The first line of defense in fighting fires is to prevent them from starting in the first place. This is probably the most profound statement in the whole fire aspect. Is the best way to fight a fire is don't let it start. Always the best way. There's going to be a number of different codes in the Canadian Standards Association, National Fire Protection Association. They have all the different regulations on how we should be storing flammable materials. So this, OH&S has been getting quite strict on this at about the 2012, 2013 area. Most of your shops probably have fireproof cabinets where you have to store things, or things need to be stored outside in certain marked and contained areas. WCB, it's a private not-for-profit organization. It's not a provincial government department or crown corporation. It's separate from the government. It's provincially legislated and guided by the WCB Act. It's supposed to provide cost-effective workplace liability and disability insurance to everyone in Alberta. 1.8 million workers, and liability insurance to 140,000 employers. So it can compensate you for lost income, healthcare, and other costs related to work injuries or occupational diseases. All employers in WCB covered industries share responsibility for fully funding the cost of worker compensation insurance. So who's paying for this? The employers are. So your job actually has to pay what's called their WCB premiums. Now, if you work at a company where safety has seemed to become one of their top priorities over the last number of years, most likely it's because they had a very poor record with WCB and they are trying to reduce their costs. Who has car insurance? Probably most of you have car insurance of some form or another.
Yeah.
And then how many of you have gotten into accidents or speeding tickets with your car insurance? And then the car insurance goes up for some reason. It's very similar with WCB. If you have a workplace where people are always getting injured, your employer is going to have a very high WCB premium. They're not going to like that. But there are things that they can do to try and reduce that, which is going to be joining a safety committee, having safety committee meetings, implementing what's called the PIC program, the Partners in Compliance, or the core recognition, certificate of recognition. Have anyone heard of either of these two programs? Partners in Compliance or certification of recognition, core. They're both safety accreditations that workplaces can get to, and essentially what they are, it's a move to step. It's a way that the government has acknowledged not only are you doing the bare minimum, but you've gone above and beyond, and so now you're taking extra steps to proactively make sure no one ever gets hurt. Not only can they reduce their WCB if they had poor records in the past, they can also reduce based on how well they're performing in the future. So they can keep going down. Just like you hear on those commercials on TV. Hey, good driving record for 10 years. Come switch to our insurance and we'll give you a 50% discount on whatever you're paying now. Same idea. We have a company that's proactively keeping people not injured. They haven't had injuries in a long time. When they do their reporting properly and in a timely manner, they can reduce their WCB costs. And this is the one thing that people don't often believe when it comes to WCB, but they are fair. They're supposed to give a fair resolution of any disagreement with WCB. They're supposed to tell you why your claim would have been rejected, under what grounds, and you can appeal their decisions. One thing also that people a misconception about WCB is its focus is to try and get you back to work, whether that be in the exact same place you were with the exact same duties, or if it's alternate, if it requires job retraining, perhaps a new job. That is what their focus is going to be on. So for instance, you're a mechanic in some terrible accident happened and now you don't have arms and legs, they're going to try and find training or some way to get you back, hopefully, to some kind of work. That's quite an extreme circumstance. I mean, losing your arms and legs is pretty much a disability guarantee for almost anybody, but some people might really be able to go back and find something, and they would help you get a modified work and retraining and all this. So what do you need to do if you get injured? Tell your employer the details, your healthcare provider that it happened at work, and they need to submit your WCB report. This one, the WCB report, if you go to a hospital, the healthcare provider will do it automatically. They'll ask you all of the questions about that. Who's ever been to the hospital with a work injury? Actually, who's ever been to the hospital? If you go to the emergency room with an injury, one of the first things they ask you is, did this happen at work? Okay, that's one of the first questions they ask you almost all of the time. As soon as you say yes, they're going to start filling out WCB. So
Yeah, I got one for metal in my eye before.
oh yeah, so yeah, you would know. Yeah, you would have immediately. You go to the hospital and you say, "Hey, I got something in my eye," and they say, "Did it happen at work?" Yes, and they'll pull out the WCB forms and start filling those out. As soon as you're done at the hospital, they'll send that away over to the WCB and get that going. Your employer then also has to put in a report within 72 hours of the incident. So they have 2 days or 3 days to put the report in. They only have to do it if there's lost time beyond the date of the accident, death or permanent disability, the need for medical treatment beyond first aid, incurring medical aid expense, or a disabling or potentially disabling condition. So for instance, if I cut my finger, you tell your employer the details of injury. You don't need to go to a healthcare worker. You go to the first aid person. They'll give you a Band-Aid and they'll put it in the first aid book. And that is now the end of everything. That's it. The employer doesn't need to send anything away if your accident only involved in lost time beyond the date of the accident. So for instance, even that eye report, if you only were at the hospital for the 1 day, got metal out of your eye, my employer then didn't need to send anything away because I was back at work the next day. That being said, WCB still knew about it because at the hospital, WCB report was filled out. So they're still aware, they just know that no lost time beyond the date of the accident occurred, which is good. Okay, you got hurt, these things happen. People are going to get injured. It's about trying to minimize the time that injuries happen, and when an injury does happen, to reduce the effects of it. Okay, rather than losing your arm, you want to just get a paper cut. That's a much better injury. So
Question. So that would affect your WCB profile though, right? Like for the company, for how much they spend?
yes. Well, no. So if it doesn't, it doesn't. Reporting doesn't. So if somebody gets hurt and they report, that's not going to automatically make their, it's not automatically going to make their premiums go up. What will make their premiums go up if there's lots of injuries, if they're constantly not reporting or late reporting, if they're catching, like, hey, there's lots of things, like someone said, missing from the first aid kit, no one's writing things in. That's where it's going to be. If they start trying to circumvent it, that's where they'll start raising the costs. Or if they see a lot of injuries. When I was on a health and safety committee and I was at a high risk work site, we, just because someone reports an injury doesn't mean that it's going up automatically. Like I said, injuries are still going to happen. A lot of this is if they're finding someone gets injured and it was because of employers' negligence. For instance, they weren't training employees properly, something to that effect, then yes, they will definitely go up. But if you had everything in place, the employee and the employer were following all the best practices and someone still got hurt, you have to report it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be flagged in WCB. So
Yeah, because where I work, there's this place you can go if you get like a cut finger, as long as it's not like disability or it's serious, you can go to this place and they must still talk to WCB, but they fix you up if it's your eye or if it's something, as long as you can fix it up within the day.
Oh yeah. Is
Yeah.
medical clinic, and this is in Grand Prairie you're talking about, eh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what's actually happened now is there's a lot of clinics that are open specifically as these WCB places. So you don't have to, like you said, what would typically happen if you get something in your eye? You're going to emergency, right?
Yeah, and that's what I did. And then my dad's like, "Oh, you should go to this place or whatever, because they can do it too. But it's faster, and they get you in and do whatever they need to, and it's all under WCB, I think."
Yep, it sure is. They're in the city. They have them too. They're fairly new. Well, not fairly new. I mean, they've been around now, I guess, 4 or 5 years. It's just a Medi clinic that doesn't do walk-in patients. They specifically do workplace injuries. So yeah, exactly the same thing. They would be sending the information, and they know all about that. They actually work very closely with WCB, and most work sites would be told about that. Hey, you have this clinic close by. For any minor injuries, send somebody here. And if it's that, and this is just trying to reduce the backlog in emergency rooms, right? You don't want people going to emergency rooms with like very simple things, like just need something to be extracted from the eye. And not saying that's always a simple thing. That could turn out to be very complicated in surgery and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of times it's just a matter of taking it out of the eye, and then you just need a little bit of rest on your eyeball so it doesn't hurt so bad. But yeah, those places do exist. Absolutely, they do work with WCB, and yeah, nothing wrong with going to those at all too.
Yeah, because he said, because my old man owns GAA, so he says it barely affects your carrier profile, or what I thought it was called carrier profile, but it turns out it's this core or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, everything will affect it. They'll
Yeah.
try to. If it affects it, I'm not sure exactly. Every workplace is also different. They go on history of how well the workplace works with WCB and all kinds of different stuff. So if you like paperwork and that kind of stuff, if you like dealing with that kind of thing, join the health and safety committee on your at your workplace. So some of the other places where you can get your information from, and where lots of companies join. So when companies are trying to get their core certification or any other kind of certification, they're going to join a group like this. Construction Owners Association of Alberta, the Alberta, what's this one called? What is it? The Alberta Construction Safety Association. And then we also have WCB as a website, and OH&S as well has a website. I showed you first there with all the legislation. So these 4 sites have all of the information about safety, bulletins, all the committees that are going on all the time, and they're putting in different initiatives so that people stay safe, essentially. I guess at this point, I'd usually ask most people where they work. It's a little bit hard to get that from here, but it's depending on where you are. Bigger places and small places will seem a lot different in their safety practices. Yet again, there's just that bare minimum that they have to follow. Anything additional to that is a nice bonus. And this is just all about those different websites that I said. All right. So I think we're about halfway through. I want to get through this section. I just need to go grab a quick drink. I'll be right back. If anyone else needs to stretch their legs quickly, just give me 5 minutes and I shall return. All right. If not, just start taking a look at this objective 3 here. Is someone drawing on here? It's drawing on my thing. All right. Okay, take a look at objective 3 and I will be right back. Alrighty. Everybody can hear me still? Yeah, good. All right. Objective 3. Just keep chugging along here. All right. Hazard assessment and controls. So when we completed this one, we'll explain why industry practice for hazard assessment and control procedures exists. So what are they? 4 main categories of hazards: a biological hazard, chemical hazard, ergonomic hazard, and a physical hazard. So what do those mean? Biological hazard, something we're all dealing with right now: viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites, living organisms that cause human diseases in humans. Numerous respiratory or systemic illnesses may result from exposure to biological hazards. So this is sort of what we're all living through right now when it comes to this COVID pandemic right now. Chemical hazards, so that's something you've all probably been exposed to before, brake clean being the one that goes into my mind right away, or even antifreeze, gasoline, diesel fuel, grease. Any of these things are all chemical hazards. So they're hazardous chemicals in direct contact with your skin or eyes. They cause skin and eye irritation, skin sensitization, dermatitis, and chemical burns. Hazardous chemicals absorbed or ingested may affect the respiratory tract, kidneys, liver, or other internal organs. So most of you have probably seen on every single can of anything you've ever sprayed in the shop in your life, it says, according to the state of California, this chemical product causes cancer and should be avoided at all costs. So yet again, one thing I like to talk about this is people don't necessarily believe it, or who has seen somebody who has seen at the end of the day, someone's done their shift and their hands are all black and dirty, like they often get at the end of our workday, and they go over to the bar salt tank and they wash their hands in the bar salt tank, shake them off, dry them off, and home they go. Has anybody seen that?
I'm not allowed to.
I've never done that.
You're not.
Thankfully, no.
I'm glad they're not letting you. That's good, because I'll tell you.
No, it's my wife. that
I
won't let
have
me.
done it.
Well, your wife must like keeping you around then. Other than that, it's so any of these things that absorb into your skin, they will have to be processed by your toxic filtration system, which is your kidneys and your liver. Most of us are probably familiar with our liver and kidneys because we've probably put them through some form of abuse or punishment, self-induced. We don't want to have them having absorbed these things. Now, if you don't believe me that your skin absorbs all these chemicals that go into your skin, you can try an experiment at home. So if any of you have some garlic, just regular raw clove of garlic, crush it up a little bit and put it into your bare hand. Now, depending on every person's a little bit different, but anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes later, you will be able to taste garlic on your tongue just from holding it in your bare hand. And that's because the active ingredient in the garlic will absorb into your skin, get into your bloodstream. Blood goes everywhere, so it's going to be flowing through your whole body. Eventually, the blood that has the active ingredient that makes the taste of garlic is going to get into your tongue. When that gets there, you can actually taste garlic. This is what happens with any of these chemicals that absorb into your skin: grease, oil, gasoline, diesel, brake clean, kerosene, bar salt, any of those petrochemicals. They're all really, really, really bad for you. Do many of you know any really old mechanics?
Yeah, I work with a few.
Work with a few? What kind of shape are they in?
Lots of them still smoke. Can't really breathe too much.
Yeah, okay, so they're still kicking it, but they're not doing so good in a lot of ways. So a lot of times any of the old mechanics I know, not only are they physically beat up, but they have some health problems and underlying issues a lot too. And a lot of this comes from chemical exposure before a time when this was really looked upon as serious. And I mean, even nowadays, like you'll have people say, what do you mean you don't need gloves for that? Well, if they enjoy having cancer or the potential, then go right ahead. But for me personally, that isn't, I already smoke. And so I had to reduce my risk of trying to get all the other carcinogens because I wanted to pick which ones I wanted to have inside of me. So that's a lot of how it's going to go, right? You need to, if you want to keep yourself safe, you're your own best advocate. And so wearing gloves, wearing protective equipment, regardless of somebody, if they think you're a wimp or not cool or whatever the case may be. It's going to be really not cool if they're dying from a huge tumor on their kidney and they can't ever drink again. They're going to be hooked up to a dialysis machine for the rest of their life and they can't work. That's super, you were super cool for getting to that point in life. So definitely worth it, okay? Always a trade-off.
I have washed my hands with Varsol just in the past when my hands were absolutely disgusting, and it's not good at all. Like I can feel it.
Yeah.
You can feel the numbness in your fingers after you go way too long, and I'd never do it if I don't have to. But
it's definitely eating away at your skin. And hey,
yeah.
like I've done it too. Like, you know, how many times it's like, oh, my hands are dirty. I need to get my phone to text my girlfriend. So break clean off my hand, dry it off on your cup rolls. You know, like we've all done these things, I'm sure, whether you want to admit it or not, I don't know. But, you know, everybody has done things that they probably shouldn't have in their life. I know lots of people, I've taught lots of people, and if you're going to stand up in front of everybody and say, I have never done anything I shouldn't have, you're probably lying. So yeah,
I guess the thing is just not doing it again after, because you can feel the numbness in your fingers. Like you can tell that it is not good for you at all.
the problem with these things, so we have, you know, like you get hit by truck's going 50, you standing still, you're dead. Okay, like, you know what I mean? A big tractor runs over you, you're dead. The problem with things like washing your hands with brake clean is it doesn't kill you immediately. It's going to kill you 50 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. You're going to get a tumor. Do you know what I mean? It's not immediate. So that's why we take it for granted that it is still a hazard. Okay. And a lot of the things that are happening at work, it's trying to prevent future hazards. Like, why would you wear hearing protection? I don't know anybody who's stood beside an impact and gone deaf from one time. But I know lots of mechanics who are older who now have a hell of a time hearing. It's because they never wore hearing protection all of those years past. So it's always about, it's a cumulative effect, what they call it. You probably won't get cancer from washing your hands and brake clean one time, but if you do it every day for 30 years, your chances of cancer are pretty good. So that's why we're doing these things like that.
I have measurable hearing damage from only 5 years as a tire tech.
Yeah, I have hearing loss as well. So 10 years in the industry and a few other things too. So I do a lot of shooting and I didn't sometimes forget my ears as well. So, but now that I'm getting older and you realize, you know, you start realizing all those things you can't hear quite so well, I'm definitely paying closer and closer attention to it. So ergonomic hazards, are we back on here now? Yeah, you can see this. Ergonomic hazards are going to be the result of a job, a tool, a procedure, or work environment, improperly designed for the work. Back injuries, repetitive strain injuries, strained muscles, or fatigue are all the result of poor fit between the worker and the work environment. So if you're, I always try and think of a very good example about this, but I don't necessarily know one. If you are yarding wheels off all the time and you don't have a bar or don't ever use a bar to yard off dualies, you might end up with a back injury at some point. I mean, some people won't, but some people will. And this is about knowing your limits as well. There is no maximum amount that you're allowed to lift by hand. But what the requirement is that you know your limits. So if you can't lift something that's 100 pounds, you shouldn't be trying to, because you're going to end up hurting yourself. And that, in the case like that, if you're lifting 1,000 times a day, lifting something that's 100 pounds off the floor onto a bench and then on to a pallet, they should probably have some sort of little material handling device, some sort of crane, something to move this for you, because you'll be much more efficient and less chance of injury if you have a machine to do it. So this is going to be just, like I said, a poor fit between the worker and the work environment. Sometimes
That's what I was kind of thinking is, or sorry, we didn't have a overhead hoist until just recently, and it would be like this ergonomic hazard. It's a pretty fine line between physical and chemical. Like, would a chemical be part of that, or is it just from constant strain of not having the tools you need to do a job properly?
No, it's just from, so
Physical.
the chemical one, it's from a hazardous substance.
Yeah, and then this one is all physical, but it's not physical hazards. It seems very similar, but
They are similar. I mean, if you hurt your back, that's, you know, you get cancer of the liver or kidneys, you still have a physical problem. This is just the way it was caused. So a back injury would be caused from lifting something incorrectly, not necessarily from not having or getting exposed to brake clean. This is like a chemical exposure, right? That's what this is like. So you get dumped with diesel fuel, or you get covered in antifreeze, something like that. That would be a chemical hazard. An ergonomic hazard is, let's say, you don't have a transmission jack, and for some reason your work wants you to replace a clutch. I don't know how you're gonna hand bomb the 500-pound transmission out of there, and you guys, 4 of you hurt your backs. That would be an ergonomic hazard. So that is, you should have had the proper lifting device. You didn't. You tried to do it by hand, and everyone got hurt or whatever. So that would be an ergonomic hazard. The one that really gets the same is a physical hazard. These are almost like these ergonomic hazards. And the only difference between these chemical ones and these physical ones is that it talks about radiation, fire, and high pressure are all a part of these ones. So noise, vibration, temperature extremes, radiation, fire, and high pressure. These are all going to be physical hazards that result in hearing loss, heat stress, frostbite, hypothermia, and other injuries or illnesses. Now, is it going to be the end of the world if you don't remember if one is a physical hazard or an ergonomic hazard? No, as long as you know it's a hazard, okay? You just have to know to keep yourself safe from some of these things. So if you're working outside for a long, long time, you need to know that you need to have proper equipment or go inside to warm up. Do you need to tell your boss it's a physical hazard as opposed to an ergonomic hazard? No, that's just like what I said earlier. That's semantics, and that's just the meaning of words. They break them down into these different groups for all kind of bureaucratic reasons, but for practicality sense, you just need to know if something's dangerous. Worksite hazard identification and assessment. So who's doing what these are called is often workplace hazard assessment, or field level risk assessment, or I think those are the 2 common names for those. Are you guys familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially what a lot of places do, they're going to have different paperwork for you to check out. It's your hazard assessment and control sheet. It's going to look something like this. And we'll actually end up filling out some of these for our shop here too, as we are a workplace with more than 25 employees. We have a health and safety committee, and we are required, just like any other workplace, to do these same assessments. So we are going to fill out hazard assessment reports before we start getting into the shop, and we'll fill them out all together, and they'll look something like this. This is a pretty basic one. Chances are you've seen something like this, a hazard identification checklist. So before you go to a job site, or before you go on site, or before you start a task, you'd have to do one of these for your specific where you are. There's many, many different kinds of these. This is just a very simple sample, but there are very many different kinds of those. Yet again, every workplace is going to be different. If you work for a company like Finning, or if you've gone on to any of into Fort McMurray sites with Shell or Leadcore or Suncor, any of those kinds of companies, you're really familiar with all that kind of stuff, because you've probably had to do an hour and a half of paperwork before you can even start your job. Which is another good point. Does anybody not get paid by the hour? If you don't want to tell me you don't have to, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. The reason I'm asking is because I'm fairly positive all of you get paid by the hour. I'd imagine so. So if your company requires you to fill out paperwork, to do an inspection, whatever their safety procedures are, they also have to pay you for that. So if it takes you an extra half an hour, extra hour and a half to complete a job, you're still going to get paid for that extra time. And they should not give you any grief about it because they have to give you the time to do all of the proper paperwork.
That's the one good thing about working for Shell, though. There's safety meetings upon safety meetings and hazard assessments upon hazard assessments. But the great thing is, even though it takes 3 hours, you still get paid for all of it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll sign whatever ticket you write. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're still getting paid. Do what they want you to do. You know, hey, then a 12-hour shift, instead of pulling wrenches for 12 hours, it turns into 3 hours of safety meetings and only 9 hours of pulling wrenches. I mean, right, that's how it has to be. And yet again, if you worked for Shell, then you know definitely what a very strict safety protocol is. They're probably, any of these oil and gas companies are probably among the strictest, what you'll see anywhere out there in industry. So, this is what it is, the job hazard analysis. So that website I showed you, the Construction Owner Association of Alberta, recommends that all workers at a work site use a field level risk assessment. This is their term for the hazard assessment. The same thing, yet again, it's the same thing, to different names for the same form is what it is. You're going to look around and identify hazards, assess the risks, control the risks, and resume work. So you look around and identify what the risk hazards are. So there's lots of people around, cords laying everywhere, there's some gasoline over there. You assess them all, so you mark them on a basically a scale of 1 to 3, not severe to severe, and you control them as best you can. So let's say there is places where there's flammable materials, well, you're going to limit their exposure to open flame and spark. So maybe I'm not going to use grinders or torch on this job. And then you can go ahead and resume work. Some places are going to have to have these joint site work safety committees, or they're voluntarily going to be established, depending on the size of your company. If you want to have a say in how your company does things, join the Worksite Health and Safety Committee. If you do have one, there has to be representatives from your shop there, and it can't necessarily be your service manager. They will be there, but you need to have actual worker representation. So it's just like your boss can't be the one who's your or union rep if you work for a union, right? Because they obviously have a conflict of interest there. They're worried about the employer, not necessarily just the employees. So same thing with that. You shop employees themselves have to have a voice in the safety committee. Emergency response plans. So the employers have to have emergency response plans in place. They must be site-specific and used as a tool in your hazard assessment by ensuring such things as equipment is properly located and stored, alarm systems are working, the procedure for evacuation or rescue is clearly spelled out, you're properly trained on first aid if necessary, and you're aware of the procedures for dealing with emergencies. This is something that all of your workplaces should have. Where everything is, like I said, where are the first aid kits, where are the fire alarms, where are they all working? Is there a procedure for evacuation? Where's the muster point? Where is it all clearly labeled? And then if you do know first aid, where are the first aid kits? Who are the first aiders so we know who to look for? All the good things like that. Yet again, this goes a lot in the WCB filing, a first aid and incident report. They're going to be held in a secure file for 3 years. You have to report everything, and this can become a way that they can look back and say, hey, this employee is getting a lot of paper cuts when they do this job. Maybe we need to change our safety procedures for this task to try and minimize those injuries that they're getting. Describe the responsibilities of workers and employers to apply emergency procedures. Emergency response plan. So what we're gonna do right now, yeah, that's what I thought. We're gonna go over objective 4, a little bit of objective 5, and then we're gonna go for a bit of a lunch break. Let's talk about this one a little bit more then. So the responsibility of the workers and employers to apply emergency procedures. We need to know exactly what happens if there is an emergency. This should be something your workplace should be doing: fire drills, evacuation drills. I was at one place, probably if you work at Shell, they probably even held first aid simulations. So someone was injured. What happens if there's an injury, like a serious injury where an ambulance needs to come and extract the worker? This will help with the involvement and development of plans. So they need you, the employer and the employee, the affected workers, need to be involved in developing these plans, because you're going to be the one doing the dangerous work. You want to know that if you are inside of a tank working and you go unconscious, that there is a plan in place to get you out and get you safe, rather than just letting you die in the tank until they can figure it out whenever they get around to it. Okay? Very, very important. Must wear your PPE. This is one of your responsibilities, not only when you're in an emergency, just all the time. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. You have to wear your PPE. Just like it's your employer's responsibility to ensure you are. And your employer's emergency response plan may include use of 911. Most of the time, they will, depending on what severity of plan we're talking about. Obviously, we're talking about if in case someone has a heart attack, here's where the AED is, and we need to call 911. So the OH&S code does cover first aid requirements for employers and employees at the work site. You'll see here, this is taken right out of that book. Do you need to memorize this? No. This is just so you're aware that these do exist. So there's going to be, based on the type of work site and the number of workers at the site, is going to determine what kind of first aid kit and how many first aiders of what standard they'll need to be. Okay. Yet again, this is just to show you that this is how in-depth they've gone into it. So everything is regulated, and this is what your employers would need to follow. All right, my favorite one, or one that I said is most important, positive attitude. So in respect to housekeeping, personal protective equipment, and emergency procedures. So who likes to work with the guy who grumbles and complains about everything? Complains every time he has to put safety glasses on, hates cleaning up after himself, which is the greenhorns would all do it. Who likes working with that guy? Or are any of you that guy? I know most people probably don't like working with them. So, a positive attitude. A lot of people don't like it when I say this. And a lot of people don't like safety glasses. They think they're uncomfortable, they get fogged up. All of these kinds of complaints that everybody hears all the time. For me, I need to wear glasses to see. So I had prescription safety glasses, and I had to wear them all the time. It's pretty easy for me to keep them on my face, so I was blind with them. Now that being said, if you really don't like wearing safety glasses, you don't have to at McDonald's. And if you would like to work in heavy equipment, you just have to accept that you need to wear safety glasses. Does that make sense? It's all about an attitude, right? Like, I'll tell you right now, for instance, can everybody see me? I don't really like wearing this all the time, right? And I don't have to. If I don't want to wear this, just don't come here, right? It's pretty simple. So it's my responsibility that they've put in place these rules. Well, in this case, it's our, right? Different levels of government have put these into effect, that you have to wear these in certain situations. So in order for me to maintain my job here, I have to wear it. If I don't like it, I don't have to, but I also don't have to be employed here then. Okay, so that's about a good attitude. If you have to do it and take it in stride. Don't grumble and complain about it, because that doesn't help anybody, and it's not going to help you get over it. No one's going to want to work with you. No one's going to want to help you or anything like that. The reason you have to wear them is because we're trying to keep everybody safe all the time. As unfortunate as it is, and I don't necessarily agree with it either, but it is the way the world is we legislate everything to the lowest common denominator. So that means if there is a chance that everybody could get injured, anybody could get injured doing this, then everybody has to wear the safety thing, right? Safety boots, safety glasses, coveralls are all pretty standard in a shop. And that's just because we've realized that the largest portion of injuries can be prevented if you wear those. So everyone has to wear it. They're all learned behaviors. So this means that the single largest contributor to your safety is your attitude, okay? Keep those glasses on, don't whine about them. I mean, if you think my glasses don't get fogged up, they get fogged up all the time. It's just the nature of the game, right? Like, it'd be like if you got a job, your service manager gave you a job, but as soon as you had a bolt that was rusted or seized, no, I don't do that anymore, right? It's part of the job. You're going to see it every now and again. It's the exceptional circumstance, hopefully, but it's just the way it is. You are ultimately responsible for the safety of everyone working around you at the job site, okay? If you are doing something unsafe and you hurt somebody, you can be held responsible for that. You need to keep an eye on what you're doing in your workspace. If you see someone else doing something unsafe, you need to tell your employer so that they can tell them to stop, okay? Now, housekeeping. So this refers to the general manner of how we maintain our job site or workplace. Like in that poor young man's story there, if someone had cleaned up that oil, maybe he wouldn't have slipped, and maybe the forklift wouldn't have run over him. You never know, but at this point, we'll never know right now, right? The accident happened. So clutter, air hoses everywhere, oil on the floor, hydraulic oil on the floor. All of these are hazards that can be cleaned up with a good attitude and some housekeeping, okay? Very, very important. And here's just some good points. Collect and dispose of garbage, store your tools in their designated places, store materials in a secure and tidy location away from work site, okay? So don't keep your oxygen and acetylene bottles randomly placed throughout the shop, leaning up against the walls and stuff like that, okay? They should be in a properly stored area and they're chained away so they're not able to fall. Always be sweeping, cleaning, and organizing your workspace. Wear your PPE and don't complain about it. Don't just wear it when you think somebody's watching you. Because if you get hurt and you're not wearing it, it's not going to be a good day for you. And the liquids, wipe up liquid spills immediately. See, this is a cluttered work site, apparently. I don't know. I didn't take this picture. This is just what they say. To me, this just looks like any average construction site around. Sometimes they are pretty cluttered. But you see there's stuff everywhere to trip over. He's putting a ladder up here. There's stuff at the bottom base of the ladder. Like, maybe we should take some time and clean stuff up, okay? There is actually a code for lighting as well. So we need to make sure we're maintaining a proper minimum amount of lighting. So those lights up at the top of the shop that no one wants to change, your employer does need to change them. All right, I'm gonna stop there. Yeah, I'm gonna stop right there. So we'll come back at, we're gonna go for lunch. So we'll come back at 1 o'clock and we'll continue on this book. We'll finish it up and then we'll start on B and finish that one as well. If you are sitting around and you would just like to, you can continue reading over this island. I'm gonna give you some time to do the self-test at the back if you wanted to try it now. Other than that, are there any questions about anything?
What time do you want us back at?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock sharp. Okay, sounds good.
I'm gonna leave the meeting open. So like if you want to stay here and you can talk amongst each other, you can all unmute or whatever right now. So I'll just leave this open here so you can come and go as you please. But I'll come back at 1 and then we'll finish up working on today. All right.
All
You
right.
said something about a test, or for homework today. Like, is there going to be a test after these modules, or these?
Yes and no. So today there isn't going to be a test for marks, but what I'm going to ask you to do, can you? Oh, I'll hang on. So what I'm saying we're going to end up doing is looking at the self-test. So if you haven't looked at your ILMs, at the back of every ILM is this here way at the back. It's called the self-test. Right here. So I'm gonna give you time to do these and then we'll talk about the answers. In the future, we are going to quizzes that will be worth marks, just not today. I thought I'd give everybody a break because we're still trying to log in and all this kind of good stuff. So
Awesome.
yeah. All right. Okay, have a good lunch, everybody. I will be back.